Are you good?
Yeah, I think so. Are you gonna be here?
I am.
Except for already high school students, nobody getting invited them. But it was up high.
I saw the email you sent.
Which
Make
one?
the edits.
5 different Arlington, Loudon,
I printed some in black and
Alexandria.
white.
Okay, and then, okay.
Superintendents.
That's cool, yeah. I'll grab
We
it.
Arlington
Yeah.
County board members.
All right.
Very good. Thanks for being here.
Board members.
Absolutely.
It was an email to an invitation.
To us?
Yeah.
Yeah, we never heard
That,
Is this transportation thing?
of it. Environmental forum.
faith, climate action, put it together. Faith, action, climate, and sustainability. So FACTS is the acronym.
Yeah. Faith Alliance.
Faith Alliance
Climate.
Climate Summit. That's
Summit, there you go. I was gonna go, I just could not pull my son and get it. Was it good? Was it interesting?
There are like 20 different.
Will you be able to do the department for
I had to leave before that.
Thursday when they shifted it to 2:30?
Because it started at 7. I got
To double check.
Faith Alliance.
Is that, I wasn't sure, is that something, I'm not required to go to that, it's just if I want fiduciary, okay. Yeah, okay. They have
to come, but you're not
mandatory. I will double check and let you know. We will record it, so if it's something.
No,
If I watch it later,
Yeah.
if you wanted to have it.
Okay,
that makes it better. I just thought I'd check, so I'm checking people.
No, this
You count me as watching the video later.
I heard about it, but I had heard about it before, I don't know.
It has some interesting legislative stuff in the presentation, so I think it's actually.
And I was like, who are the students? There should be a student who's, because there are students from Loudon and Arlington. That's right.
That was particularly out.
No gavel.
No gavel.
Hello, good evening. Are we all ready to get started?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to the Monday, October 7th work session. Let's get started. Cindy, can you call roll, please?
Sure, Mayor. Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Ms. Flynn?
Here.
Ms. Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Ms. Dunn? Ms. Underhill?
Here.
And Mayor Hardy?
Here.
Thank you.
Before we jump into the agenda items, I wanted to hold a moment of silence today in remembrance of the anniversary of October 7th for all the innocent lives lost and the trauma in the Middle East. I think as a community, we grieve with everybody and hold space for everyone who's experienced loss, fear, and suffering, and we all wish for peace. I would ask that we join in a moment of silence together. Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor, just a quick comment. It's would be entirely appropriate if this day goes down in memory as a day of infamy, not unlike December 7, 1941, or 9/11, not only for the terrible events of this day, but the killings and the destruction of families, communities, and economies that have followed.
Thank you. Wyatt?
All right, thank you, Mayor Hardy and members of council. First item on our work session agenda is a request by West Falls Development for a 30-day extension for the outside closing date for the senior component of the West Falls project. Joining us at this meeting is William Maggart, who's with Experience Senior Living. And we also have Mary Beth Afedesian, representing Hoffman Associates. Henry Zhang is our lead staff for this requested amendment to the comprehensive agreement to grant this 30-day extension. The staff recommendation is to review this, discuss this together, and schedule it for council consideration, formal consideration, at your regular meeting on October 28th. Mr. Zhang.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Henry Zhang. I'm the case planner for the West Falls project. Before I started, I need to let you know there's a color handout which shows the entire West Falls project. the layout. The parcel we're talking about is under the name of the reserve. That's the D1 parcel. Basically, I will start it with the staff report line number 3. Basically, council is requested to adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the 7th Amendment to the Comprehensive Agreement to extend the outside closing date for the senior component from the existing October 31st to November 30th this year. As Mr. Shields pointed out, this deadline for transferring D1 parcel has been amended several times. The current deadline was approved back in 2023 in the 6th Amendment by the City Council. If you recall that ESL is the senior living developer approved by the council back in the 5th Amendment. This request to extend the deadline under the 7th Amendment is very limited to 30 days only, without any other amendment. Line 29, as stated in the closing date extension letter, which you will find in the attachment number 2, ESL is actively working towards the closing. Right now, they have already put in several applications for building permit. And also they are in the middle of posting 4 bonds with the city. All these permits currently pending. Actually, the foundation permit has been approved, subject to inspection. This ESP approved back in 2022, in October 24th, so it's almost 2 years now. There's no significant change of the total number of the dwelling units. Line 86, given the limited extension of the closing deadline by 30 days only, this proposed amendment doesn't have any significant negative impact on the senior project. In terms of timing, line 91, it's immediate. The existing closing date is October 31st, which is quickly approaching. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for question. Thank you.
And I would also note that Mr. Maggart with Experience Senior Living is on the call as well, and Mayor Hardy, maybe we could invite him if he would like to say anything about this request as well.
Sure, welcome.
And just as he was turning on his microphone,
Might have dropped the call.
I'm not sure, it looks like he might have dropped off. There he is.
Welcome. Can you all hear us?
I'm having a hard time hearing every word. I heard you say, Wyatt, there he is.
Okay, Mr. Maggart, the floor is yours if you'd like to speak to the request for the 30-day extension or provide any other updates with your progress.
And I will note for those in the room, we've gotten a report that the team's audio is having trouble. It's dropping some words, so I've alerted Sophie.
I can't hear what people are saying. It's every other word, maybe every third or fourth word I'm picking up. But if the floor is mine, first I want to say thank you to staff for getting us this far. As Henry mentioned, we've made great progress with the SESP and with our permit applications. And so I want to thank the staff for their help. And in terms of progress, as we're nearing the finish line, and we must close this transaction by November 27th, I want to turn the microphone over to Hunter McLeod so he can give you a little bit more color on the progress we've made, even in this difficult capital environment, to form the capital to get us ready to close this transaction. Hunter?
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everybody. I'll second Bill and just thanking everybody for their help getting us this far. We have been very busy getting to where we are today. The capital markets seem to be coming back alive, and we've identified a lender group and 2 equity groups to take us to the finish line. With that said, as is such, things have not moved at the pace that we anticipated. And while everyone is working diligently to close as quickly as possible, at this time, we just need a short extension to ensure that we get all parties to the table by the end of November. I think the project's been very well received from all the groups that we've talked to. There's been significant interest, and both the capital markets, but also from a resident and neighborhood perspective. We've had a couple dozen inquiries on deposits already. So I think the project in its infancy is being well received, and we continue to work with Hoffman to make sure that this becomes a reality. So that punchline is, we are getting close to the finish line, but we need a few extra days to get us over the hump and get this thing closed.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the 2 gentlemen? Okay, I have one. So you said you're close to the finish line, but do you expect, and hopefully not, hopefully the answer is no, but do you expect another extension if we don't get to end of November? Or is it looking pretty promising?
It's looking pretty promising. We don't anticipate another extension at this time unless the markets go the complete opposite direction. So there's always that caveat, but as of today, we're feeling pretty good about where we are.
Okay. Sure, Erin?
I had one question. In the attachments, your letter to the city referenced maybe issues with Dominion and the power for the building that was going to necessitate maybe changes in construction plans. And I was just wondering if you could comment on, assuming that the date, holds, what your timeline is in terms of actual construction, given some of those issues that you sort of forecasted or foreshadowed.
Sure, great question. Yeah, Dominion changed some of the dimensions for their boom length related to the transformer, and I won't go into details, but the short answer is we have come to a resolution with Dominion. It's a very painful resolution as we are moving a lot of our underground systems and actually redesigning our SOE and some of our foundation systems. With that said, we've made great strides in the last 3 weeks, and we're anticipated to be complete with those changes in the next couple weeks, with the hope of being resubmitted to the city to get signed off on all of our permits. I don't anticipate a significant or any delay in that front. So if we close at the end of November, we would like to be moving dirt by the end of December.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant or for staff? Okay. I had tangential request that we've talked about, Wyatt, which was kind of the financial terms. I think related to just West Falls in general, I think it would be helpful to get a refresher of the financial terms and the comprehensive agreement summarizing.
So we'll, thank you for that request and that reminder. When this comes to the council on the 28th, in advance of that meeting, I'll have a kind of a memo or a few slides just to summarize the key deal terms to refresh everybody's memory.
Great.
Can I?
Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I wonder if you could give us a little more explanation of the graphic that has been provided. So as I understand it, the dark blue spaces have been fitted out for food and beverage, but there's no lease on them. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Actually, all those listed here, they have the lease already. All those retailers.
Pardon?
All they have lease signed.
The blue spaces have been signed?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Only those space with the retail names. So those without retail name, that means they're still not signed the lease yet.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. What has not signed the lease yet?
Those spaces with the name of the retailer, those are signed retailers.
Right.
And then those without have not been signed
Right,
yet.
so the blue spaces that according to the legend here, vended food and beverage, there are no leases for those yet, unless there's a logo on them, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, that's what I had, thanks.
Aaron?
Yeah, so similarly, I guess on the graphic, Wyatt, maybe you know the answer to this. Did we square away this landing pad for the police potentially within West Falls?
We've identified the location of the police landing pad as you've described it, which is a good description. It will be a functional space where police will have some office space, desk for being able to do some work, a parking space for it, and that I think is in a fairly satisfactory place right now.
And then separately, while we have a Hoffman representative here, can we talk about the condition of the roads around the construction site? I mean, I don't know, I think it's embarrassing for the city, frankly, kind of at this point in terms of kind of some of those conditions, the fact that we've been waiting as long as we have for the kids, to get across to the school safely. And I was just over there recently. I know I had previously put in a request about some of the dips in the road, especially, going towards Idlewood sort of direction. So what is it, west? And they were done in terms of patch fillings. And then I was over there, again on Saturday and, went down into the big metal plate dips. And I think, beyond sort of the experience for drivers moving through there, we've heard from other people, like motorcyclists, for example, how they're not even using the road right now because they don't feel like they can cross safely given kind of all the obstructions in the actual road. And so I think it is kind of an issue that we need to address. And so I don't know if you can give us an update or sort of a commitment on when the roads are gonna be in better condition than they are.
So I will just, did you want to speak?
If you want me to. I mean, she called me up to the table, so I came.
Sure.
Up to you.
Go ahead, and I might have a word to say as well.
Sure. The roads are always the last to go because they undergo a lot of wear and tear while the construction's going on. They are there is a cycle, or there is a segment for them in the schedule, rather, to be completed. The biggest hurdle that has kept things from moving as far forward as we would even like that to see has been the approval of the traffic signals. 2 of them by VDOT, 2 of them by the City of Falls Church. The City of Falls Church gave us the approval much more quickly than VDOT did. We just got those approvals. We finally got the approvals and they're in the queue at the factory for those poles to be fabricated, the light poles, or the signal poles rather. And so the VDOT poles on Route 7 are expected to be delivered to the site by the end of January and installed within a month. I'm not sure yet how long VDOT will require us to bag them before. They usually want them to be bagged until people get used to the lights being there for some period of time. But by the end of the first quarter of this coming year, 2025, you should be good to go all the way around the site.
And I mean, Wyatt, or, you know, if you want to speak further to it, I mean, we're still talking 6 months from now in terms of what the current conditions of the road on like Route 7 and Haycock look like versus even starting to make improvements to them. So kind of.
Well, I think what we were hearing was about having the signals put in themselves. In terms of resurfacing the road, could you speak to the schedule for that?
Well, there's still a lot of work to be, you know, to put in the wiring for the signals and whatnot. And so there's like not a desire to resurface the roads until you've finished all the digging that you have to do in trenching to put the signals and the connecting wiring in place. So it'll all sort of come together at one time towards the, as I said, the end of the first quarter.
So it is definitely dirty, disruptive. It's been very difficult for everybody trying to get through Haycock Road and Route 7. We do inspections regularly just for basic safety, and so we watch that every day. We also have VDOT that is in charge of Route 7, and they do safety inspections on a regular basis as well. So we have maintained basic safety, as bumpy and inconvenient as it has been. And so I did want to just provide assurances about that.
I had a slightly different question really about Mustang Alley. I think as the days are getting shorter and school starts early, I think it's pretty dark along Mustang Alley and crossing Haycock. And so whether we should do some temporary lighting to help people get across the street there, I think would be appropriate. Because there's the Jersey, so when I was leaving the football game on Friday night, it's also just hard to see at night when you're coming over that hill on Haycock with the barriers. And so I just think it would be helpful to have additional lighting as a safety measure for any pedestrians going to the metro or going to school, knowing that we got to live with this another 6 months or so. So something for staff or the developer team to consider.
I think we did have those there during the darker days last year.
Maybe it's time to bring them back again for.
Yeah. So why don't we follow up and talk about that, and we can report back to the council before the 28th.
Great. Going back to.
Sure. Madam Mayor, just in another transportation development, Metro has been reallocating the bus routes, and 28A will become F20, and it will include a stop at West Falls Church. And Cindy's been working on that, and so have I for some time, so I wanted to report that good news. The 28A route, which is the most popular in the Metro system, will be preserved as F20, and it will include a stop at West Falls Church, thereby laying the groundwork for the bus rapid transit. Thanks.
Even more reason to have lighting. How soon is that happening? Does it say? Like imminent?
Well, there's a current stop at West Falls Church Metro, and with the work that the Better Bus Network study's happening, it will remain. It kind of goes down Haycock and loops around. Eventually, when the boulevard's totally done, then it'll go straight from 7 to the Metro station.
So it's not an additional stop?
No, it was just initially proposed to be removed, so we had to do some coordination.
It gives us some flexibility too to engineer how and where that stop goes, and then to lay the groundwork for the bus rapid transit. So,
Mary Beth, I had one more question for you, related to the diagram of your first floor. Actually, two questions. One is, As we look at the project finishing and then stabilizing, have you started leasing and selling condos, how that's going? And then second is, what percentage of the ground floor is leased? It looks like you have lots of names on things, but in terms of first floor, ground floor retail leasing, how's that going? If you know percentage roughly.
Site-wide, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't include the reserve ground floor because it still has, 2 years before it's able to be leased while
Phase
they
1A then.
build it. So as for this, that is part of Phase 1, but it's just Phase 1 delayed a little bit. But for the rest of it, we're about 70% leased on the retail. There are a couple new retailers that, this graphic is a tiny bit old. We had just 2 leases signed last week, or maybe it was the week before. One at the corner of Leesburg Pike and the entrance to the project. It's currently shown as A1 120, if my eyesight is right. That's going to be Chase Bank. And then at the opposite end of that same building, the other corner, A1 170, is a Thai restaurant called Dak Khao. So those two could be added to your graphic. When we get the chance to update this, Henry, we'll get you a cleaned up version. And we have quite a bit of interest in the other spaces that are left. Practically every single one. So I'm quite encouraged that this will be a very vibrant and active retail environment once we're all finished.
Great. And how about on the residential front? How's your multifamily and condo sales going?
The condo sales are, we're still not at our 51% to start settlements. We're not even quite halfway there. But lately, we've had a lot of activity, a lot more people that are coming in, doing tours and making appointments to do contracts. So we expect a lot of those appointments to convert into sales or reservations for sales. The Alder Apartments, the rental apartments, we started our pre-leasing efforts and have a number of reservations for those. I'd say about 15 or 16 units so far. Kind of not pushing it yet because we still have a number of hurdles that we have to achieve before we can open the building. So we're just getting the word out, and there seems to be a lot of interest.
Great. Thank you for those updates. Okay. Well, with that, I think that's it for this item then. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on our agenda is a discussion with staff on options for how we charge and finance our solid waste services. And if I could make just a few introductory comments, then I'll turn it over to our solid waste coordinator, Lonnie Marchetti. I do want to note we have our interim director of public works for operations, Mr. Herb Holmes, is here in the room with us, and our deputy city manager, Andy Young, is also here at the table. Just by way of some introductory comments, this discussion is on the council's strategic priorities, and it's also a discussion that's called for in the adopted solid waste master or 20-year solid waste strategic plan, and it has been for about 2 decades. Is a discussion about how we pay for solid waste. And there are 2 kind of principal concerns that we're trying to initiate a discussion about. One is having incentives to go further in our efforts to divert waste from the incinerator and landfill and towards reducing the things that go into the waste stream, reusing things and recycling things to lower our costs and to meet our environmental goals. What we'll do tonight is first we'll just give a kind of a quick, concise overview of our solid waste programs, and we'll walk through 4 options. I want to say 2 things. One, the status quo is an option as well. The city currently finances and charges for its solid waste services through general taxes, and we've done that for as long as we've had these services. It is a viable way to do it, and it has some pros and cons, and we'll discuss those. Over the years, some residents who live in multifamily units have questioned the fairness of that way of structuring it because they pay the general taxes but are not eligible. Our service is really not set up to serve our multi-story, multi-family homes. That's not a unique situation. There are services throughout government that people can't access for whatever reason or another, and so that's a concern that's been expressed, and the council has wanted to attempt to respond to it, but there are, it's not necessarily a unique situation. And then the last thing I'll say by way of introductions is that there is a potential fifth option which was raised by members of the multifamily community about having essentially a rebate to condo owners in lieu of some of the other options that we have here. In discussing that with the city attorney, we don't think that is a viable option under Virginia law. There are examples in DC and some other places where that is done for condo owners, but under Virginia law, local governments are very restricted in terms of our ability to do things like that within the tax structure. So that is why that, which was an option that was suggested by some in the community, is not amongst those four that are listed here tonight. So with that introduction, let me just ask Mr. Holmes or Mr. Young if you had any other introductory comments before we turn it over to the our staff lead on this, Lonnie.
Let's go to Lonnie.
Okay. Ms. Marchetti, thank you for all your work and thought on this, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, everyone. As Wyatt said, we will go through our options. There are four options. So let's get started. Next slide, please. This is an overview of our agenda. We will talk about just the program overview, curbside services that we provide, and then we will touch on option one, which is essentially remove the curbside services from the tax rate. Option two will be to implement a pay-as-you-throw system. Option three is to implement a third bin, all just for organic waste. And then option four, we will briefly touch on providing services to multifamily properties. Next slide, please. So the solid waste program overview, so it is out of Public Works. We provide weekly collection, trash, yard waste, recyclables, and opt-in for composting. Special or bulk collections, if you will, it is available for an additional fee. Refuse and we'll just say solid waste services for all of our city facilities, including street cans and parks. Operation of the city's recycling center, and coordination for our annual events like the extravaganza and our cleanup events. Next slide, please. So this slide, it just briefly touches on what residents have, what size carts. So currently we have about 2,600 residents out of 3,053 current curbside residents that have a 65-gallon cart. 319 opted for the 35-gallon cart. And then there are 117 residents that currently do not have a trash cart. Typically the 117 are for townhome users that do not have the storage to be able to store their carts in their small backyards. And then the city, we do not charge for cart replacement. So if they're damaged, the cart gets stolen, whatever have you. So we replace that at no charge to the resident, and that annually is anywhere between $7,000 to $10,000 a year. Next slide, please. This just lists our solid waste services and vendors. We have American Disposal that services curbside, trash, recycling, yard waste, as well as our city facilities and our street cans. We have WB Waste, who services our recycling center, Compost Crew for composting, Fairfax County for our tipping. Printing, we use Welsh here in the city, eAsset also in the city. Solid waste services for collection in our parks is Did Lake. Next slide, please. This is a slide that overviews our tonnage over the span of over the past 5 years, excuse me. So our most recent data, as you can see on the far right, is 2023, and then it goes kind of backwards. As you can see, there are some years that we did dip quite significantly low in glass, but that essentially coincides with removing glass from curbside. So we started that in 2019. So in 2020, 2021, we obviously saw that pretty significant dip. Not only did we just remove glass, but we also, the market also took a pretty big dip, and not everything as we were used to recycling was also recyclable. Next slide, please. This is an overview of solid waste cost components, if you will. So for tipping fees, for solid waste recycling is $550,000. Tipping fees is about $230,000. Composting, just for the for us to subsidize for curbside is $70,000. Miscellaneous costs like cart replacements, sticker purchases, things in that is about $20,000. And then we have curbside leaf collection, which is about $250,000. So that averages out to roughly, if we were to take everything listed here, it averages out to be about $370 per customer. Next slide, please.
Hey, Lonnie.
Yes, ma'am.
Lonnie, can you just clarify is a tipping fee what we pay to the Fairfax County dump to dump stuff? What is a
So the
tipping fee
tipping
exactly?
fee is not only to Fairfax County, but also to American Disposal and to Free State Farms, which used to be Balls Ford Composting Facility in Prince William. So it's all three of those.
And
So-
can I just make a correction to the chart? The top line should be the curbside collection. So that's
I'm
$550.
sorry.
And then the tipping fees is $230.
Correct, I apologize. The $550 is just for American to provide services. I apologize, that was a typo. The second line of $230 is just tipping fees. Apologies.
But those two go hand in hand. You can't have the
Yes,
curb
correct,
collection without the tipping fees.
correct.
Okay.
But one is based on number of households that they're picking up from, and one is based on volume of trash, right?
Correct.
Do we pay for the glass recycling?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Is that part of that cost in there, or is that part of that miscellaneous, or?
It is not. I did not add anything from our recycling center into this because there was no way to identify what percentage was produced by quote unquote curbside residents, businesses, Fairfax County residents, Arlington, etc. So we left that out.
Got it.
Yeah, this was intended to just get at the curbside service, which is the kind of where the equity question has been raised. And one other thing that is not in this is staff costs. We have one FTE in solid waste, which is our star presenter tonight. But that, Ms. Marchetti serves all programs and serves all residents. So we thought, for just counting curbside, we didn't charge that to arrive at that number.
Any other questions?
Not for now. Keep going, please. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So this is option one. It is essentially just to remove curbside services out of the tax fee, or excuse me, out of the tax base, and essentially just charge that as the $370 from the previous slide. I mean, going this route would create some greater transparency, equity. The fee would essentially be a separate line, kind of like how Fairfax, Arlington, et cetera, how they do it on their bills. It would just be a separate solid waste fee, or whatever we end up calling it. The challenges are most users would essentially see a net increase in expenses. This could essentially create new equity concerns to lower income houses, small houses versus large houses, new admin cost, and possible tax, just kind of like what I said, some homeowners would feel it more than others. Next slide, please. So this is a table essentially showing the property value, what the tax reduction, would be if we were to remove 2 cents from the tax rate. The preliminary solid waste fee is the $370, and then the net impact is what we would foresee homeowners kind of experiencing. So if your property value is around $750, you would save $149, but you would essentially see a net impact of $218. Again, I would like to preface that this is just preliminary numbers, but it's around these numbers. So the smaller house that you would have, the bigger cost that this program would essentially affect you, versus having the more expensive home in the city, then you would essentially see a decrease. Next slide, please.
The anti-equity.
That
doesn't make sense.
I'm sorry?
Nope, go ahead, thank you.
Oh.
We'll save our comments afterwards.
Oh. So option 2 is to replace the tax with a variable rate, if you will. So the thought process behind this is to really hit it home, if you will, with our environmental goals, if you will. So it would essentially still be, remove the 2 cents out of the tax rate. We would offer a price incentive. So if you have a smaller cart versus the larger cart, there would also be that cost savings. And it realistically would hopefully entice residents to really reduce and reuse in this. The challenge is this will be a little tricky, and we will definitely have some admin costs associated with this. Implementing this program will likely result in getting another staff member. And this will, if we were to go this route, we would realistically have to do a lot of outreach. So that is the challenge here. Next slide, please. Again, this is preliminary numbers. But this is essentially kind of what we broke it down to be. If you were to have a 65-gallon, again, this is just for illustration, but a 65-gallon would be about $415 versus a 35-gallon would roughly cost you about $230. So again, this would essentially entice residents to recycle more, think before they buy, and reduce and reuse as much as possible. Next slide, please. This is my favorite one. Option 3, which is also in our 20-year solid waste management plan that we submitted to DEQ, is we chose organic waste to essentially be the stream that we tackle to achieve zero waste. So essentially the thought process behind adding this third bin would be for all organic waste. So it'd be your grass clippings, your food waste. It goes all into one cart. So instead of 2 carts, you'd have 3. This program, if you will, we would essentially have to investigate, as I mentioned, with the 117 customers that have no carts. Offering this program would just kind of cause more problems there. So we would have to investigate some different cart sizes from them. And it is essentially $155,000 to purchase carts initially to implement this program. Next slide, please. So this is the third bin, kind of a cost breakdown. So American Disposal, who is our current curbside hauler, would essentially pick up this third bin. So that would roughly cost about $75,000. I took the average over the span of 5 years and came up with $50,000 for our new tip fees. Then we have the subsidy that we are paying currently for opt-in curbside composters for the 70. So essentially, this would cost customers about $41 per year. No, 18, I believe, 18. That's also a typo, I apologize. It's written in the staff report as 18. Next slide. So this is option 4, is essentially to service commercial multifamily buildings. There would be a lot of legwork that we would essentially have to do. We would have to get an ordinance. We would have to update the city code. We would have to work with each individual building to essentially figure out if providing services to them would be feasible, essentially. There are 3 buildings currently that it would essentially make sense to offer this service to because they're not necessarily mixed use. So condos without mixed use, we have 3 buildings. Condos with mixed use, we have 5 with 1 under construction. And then we have 12 apartments plus 3 under construction. Next slide, please. So multifamily cost would essentially cost the city roughly anywhere between $15,000 to $40,000 per year per building. Most of these buildings will essentially need twice a week, at the bare minimum, twice a week service. We would offer sizes of dumpsters 4 and 8 yards. So I would recommend that we do not essentially kind of group in mixed use condo buildings, mainly because of the fact that most of them have one central location for their dumpster location. So it would almost make it impossible to try to figure out what waste came from what facility, whether it's commercial or residential. So that's something that City Council would have to provide some light on. Next slide, please. So this essentially, we would need a further analysis to develop these options more fully. We would need to create a lot of community outreach. There's some technical work, legal aspect, finance, contracting, IT for if we were to go to a pay-as-you-throw system. So tonight for council, we are asking for feedback on options to help identify the scope of work for consulting services. We believe that all of these options, all 1 through 4, will need a consultant to come in to essentially help us. Consider a budget amendment for a consultant, which should cost about $200,000. And we can, option 1, we can essentially implement probably midway through FY26, but there are some complex options that will probably be more towards FY27. Next slide. And that is it.
Great. Thank you, Lonnie. And thank you for taking my light bulbs on Saturday, too. I appreciated being able to stop in it. Okay. Who's got questions or comments on this one? Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Lonnie, thanks for that really good explanation. I started this process knowing nothing about this, so I feel like you have really given us a good education on how it all works. Thank you. Would we have the opportunity to implement 2 and 3? Or is it options 1 or 2 or 3 or 4? Could we do?
So, yes, you can,
Yeah.
you can implement options 2 and 3, yes.
Or 1 and 3, or, so
Correct.
we could end up with a blended version of some of these.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then this doesn't, currently, commercial properties all have their own solid waste, correct?
Correct.
All commercial properties, okay. So this doesn't contemplate that at all, changing that system?
Well, so when we say commercial, for example, apartment buildings, they essentially pay taxes. And, you know, I mean, I assume that they would be part of option 4. And then you have condo buildings, for example, Park Towers, it's just the condo building. But then you have the Byron, which essentially has the mixed use at the bottom.
Right.
Or excuse me, the commercial at the bottom. So all the commercial, like the businesses, we would not provide services for. This would just be for the residential aspect of them.
Okay, okay. That's all my questions right now.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just have a general statement on the pay-as-you-throw, or just thinking about implementing any change to solid waste as we look at our community energy action plan, is like, how do you continue to incent people to throw away less, to compost more? And I don't have specifics tonight. On the equity front, you'd like to think if you had a smaller house and you used less, that you paid less. And from an environmental perspective, you want to entice people as much as possible to use less, recycle more, compost more. So I kind of have overarching perspective on what the goals are versus like the nitty gritty of dollar per dollar or who does what. But like as overarching goals, I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. That's all I wanted to add to the conversation at the moment.
That's where I personally started from as well, as like, what goals are we trying to accomplish? I think when we put this on the work plan, it was coming out of the solid waste 20-year document where we kind of committed to, or we wanted to go to something like that says, could we be a zero waste community one day? But we weren't quite willing to go there yet. And so I think that would be goal number 1. It's just, you know, being reminded that recycling frankly doesn't work. And so really it's about reducing and reusing where possible. So how do we decrease our solid waste? And then when we heard from the condo associations, I think it's being more equitable and more transparent. So if we agree that those are our 3 collective goals, I think that would naturally lead us to some options or some combination of options out of the 4 or 5 that you've outlined for us, Lonnie. I guess I would suggest us starting there. Like, do we agree those are the right 3 goals? And if so, I think the options, at least for me, flow pretty naturally from that.
I would agree that those are the goals that we are trying to accomplish. As I mentioned when I was presenting option 3, which is adding that 3rd organic cart, that is very specific into our DEQ plan. That is one waste stream, as the swim pack identified, that we could essentially kind of tackle roughly quickly just by implementing this 3rd cart. It would be available, obviously, to all curbside customers, and then we can essentially kind of think about how to offer this to multifamily buildings as well. So, I mean, I would agree with you.
Yeah, and I think I saw that Arlington moved to adding a 3rd cart for everybody as well, probably with hopes of actually reducing their tipping fees. I think the staff report outlined that it's $155,000 one time for the cost of the new bins, and then $55,000 per year in terms of operating cost increases. Does that also
Correct.
account for hopefully decrease in tipping fees? Because we theoretically would throw less trash away, right?
Well, that is just for organic waste, but in theory, I don't foresee organic waste saving any money in the tipping fees there. If anything, that would entice more residents to participate in that program, so that would most likely increase. However, yes, on the Fairfax County side, that our tip fees should decrease, correct?
Do we have any early data on how much that would decrease, whether it would offset your $55,000 per year a little bit?
No, we do not. And that is one thing that the consultant would essentially try to show us.
So I think in both cases, you're paying tipping fees. So you're paying tipping fees if it's going to Fairfax County. And if you're sending it to the compost facility, we're paying tipping fees for that as well. So for the simplicity of this analysis, we considered it a wash. In fact, I think we projected a little bit of an increase.
I just didn't know whether the net 55,000 was the tipping fees for the new composting, or if it included the decrease in traditional solid waste. That make sense?
It did, it does.
Like using my household, for example, in the summers when we have 2 watermelons a week, it fills up the garbage. So if I compost that and I don't throw in the trash, that should be less trash. That should save us money on the trash side, even though we're increasing costs on the composting side.
So I think to Lonnie's point, that's like the level of detail we didn't get into here that we would want the consultant to help us with. But I wouldn't expect 55 to turn into 0, right? It might have an impact, but I don't think it would be, I don't think it would make the cost go away.
Okay. Justine?
In terms of implementing the composting program, would that be something we could partner with Arlington on? I know that's jumping ahead, but do you foresee that potentially being something that could offer cost savings?
I'm not sure as to who Arlington uses for their hauler. We essentially would be taking it all to the same place. It's all going to the same facility in Prince William. But I'm not sure as to who they use as their hauler. And it would realistically depend on what their cost is. So right now, in order for us to add this third bin, it could cost us about $2 per stop. So 3,053 residents at $2.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about what the complexities are with pay as you throw? Like, why would that require additional staff?
Sure. So we would, it all realistically would start with a consultant. And to really identify what, if this program would even suit a small jurisdiction like us, we would have to do what is called a waste characterization. And that essentially is you have a team of consultants, probably about 10, 15 folks, that essentially would identify tons and tons of our trash on one particular day. So they would identify, okay, well, out of, X tons is recyclable, X tons is food waste, etc. Based off of that, then we could essentially say, okay, well, residents, most of you have the 65 gallon, but most of you can go down to the 35 gallon. So that would essentially help us try to kind of save money in the front end. On the back end, this is something that we would essentially rely heavily on the consultant to essentially suggest what other localities are doing. There are essentially none in Virginia. However, Colorado, for example, just implemented kind of a variable rate based off of your cart. So they would essentially gather all of that data and present it to us, suggest what type of programs we would need, because we would essentially have to give information over to the treasurer's office every year to kind of get all of that done, to kind of oversee, help people with implementing this type of new program. I mean, there's I'm sure 100 of other things, but as Wyatt mentioned, solid waste is a team of one. So this would be a heavy lift on top of providing all of my other duties on a daily basis.
And in terms of, if we were to move forward with the consultation or the people that basically look at, what these options are, everything, if we went forward with, let's say, I'm picking 2 and 3, that would the soonest that would likely be implemented would be 2027.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And if we did go with option 2 and option 3, they would probably be implemented at the same time. So whatever education campaign or whatever else that happens, those would be happening together.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for me right now.
Dave?
Sure. Thanks, Madam Mayor, and thanks for the work on this. It's always good to examine what we're doing to determine if there's a better way to do it. I would be very concerned about removing this from the taxes and making it a special fee. I think that would not be well received. On the other hand, there are some potential ideas here that I think merit further work. The composting is a way to increase that. I also will note that one of the larger expenditures is the curbside leaf collection, and I'm not suggesting eliminating that quickly, but I do know that Falls Church Forward has been looking at that. It caused me to do some research, actually, and research is very consistent, I think, with what they're suggesting. I think there'll need to be an education campaign. I think also if you have a lot of mature trees and they have a lot of leaves, it's still potentially, you're going to need to move some of them away, but I think there's real potential here to both save money, do something for the environment. So hopefully that would be something we can continue to work through and provide ever better information to the public so we can start to see changes that would be mutually beneficial. So I wanted to call attention to that, and that's $250,000 of the 1.1 million, so it's a significant cost. So I think that's worthy of looking at. I think the composting, to see how we can increase that. The pay-as-you-throw may seem like it's a good idea, and I guess I've learned this being a grandparent. Little children, little ones, generate a lot, and it would sort of be viewed as anti-family if we started charging on the basis of that. So bottom line for me is that we keep it in the tax rate, that we not try to break it out, but we look where there are potential savings within that. And I'm thinking the curbside leaf collection might be one where we can evolve some significant savings. That we look at the composting service and we see what we can do for some of the 100% condo buildings, see if we're able to generate some savings to produce some service, and if not direct service, maybe a joint contract between the various multifamily buildings that we could maybe trigger a forum and bring in maybe our providers to see if there might be some savings that are available through a joint contracting effort. So just a couple ideas going forward. But I do note that one of the options is maintaining the status quo, and we shouldn't forget that. Thank you.
Okay, other thoughts, Erin?
Yeah, thank you for kind of setting out the various options here and kind of giving us different things to consider with the cost or preliminary cost estimates. I think I have a similar reaction in terms of, not necessarily wanting to take this out of the general funds, like general tax rate. To me, looking at option, one, it looks regressive in that you're taking it out of the tax rate, but then, because of the flat fee, you're placing a disproportionate burden on, those households with lower assessed values. And so the overall out-of-pocket cost, increases. And so it gets at sort of, policy rationales behind tax systems generally, and, the idea that people are paying into it and you're redistributing funds somewhat for the kind of general welfare of the public in terms of orderly, trash pickup and a sanitary environment and sort of the administrability benefits of having like citywide trash collection on a single day, even if not everyone is benefiting from it, like the entire city benefits from like getting through trash collection in the span of 6 hours, for example, right? So like it's not sort of not everyone is benefiting this, so let's, put a special kind of assessment on them the same way that not everyone benefits from the various services that people generally pay into and that, the general fund covers. So that's kind of my reaction to number one, and then similarly to option two, I think you can view it as incentivizing, certain behavior, or you can view it as like punitive and kind of penalizing certain behavior or households, or as, Councilmember Snyder said, if you have a household and maybe, you use disposable diapers and, or you have a few more members of your household, then, you're paying higher fees, even though, maybe you have 5 people in your household and another household has 2, and the cost per person of the trash that they're generating is lower overall, but like you're still paying higher into the system. So I think also just based on administrability and the idea that we're going to have to, additionally staff this option, to me, doesn't seem to have like the benefits, as opposed to doing like much stronger education for the community about, the different ways that you can reduce your footprint and, including moving from, generating solid waste or having your, organic material and food waste in your trash. So I tend to kind of think status quo on the trash collection, recycling aspect of it, but then would like to incentivize, the behavior of diverting, food and yard waste from the general waste stream. And, with the cost estimates of the $155,000, one-time cost, and then the $55,000 annual cost, would support looking at that more, far more kind of seriously, in order to try to see, what that would look like as a citywide, system or a partnership kind of with buildings, while still being able to provide the third bin, maybe not, cart, but like bin size. Smaller. I mean, I know from our experience, we don't do composting like in terms of pickup. We just like 4 times a week walk across to the community center and put our composting in the general community center, citywide composting program. And we like have hardly any real solid waste. And so we have an oversized bin with like, 1 bag in it, for example, because of everything that we're able to divert into, kind of composting. So would be supportive of looking at that more. As to option 4, I do think it's worth kind of examining the condos without mixed use. In my mind, kind of the distinctions are sort of how we've laid them out here. I get that, some people might say, why is it that, we're servicing residential condos without mixed use and not condos with mixed use? I think that, they're by right residential properties paying property tax versus residential mixed-use properties that came in sort of with a special exception in order to be able to build, and with that understanding, sort of took stock of impacts that it would have on the city, and the developers in those instances decided to absorb the trash, collection for those buildings, or we negotiated that. So I do think that kind of, looking at these 3 buildings more closely makes sense, along with the kind of composting option number 3. I guess I would wonder, for the preliminary estimate of 15 to 40,000, kind of where that came from. Was that information that the HOAs or kind of condo boards were able to provide to us at all, or kind of have we had direct conversations with them about what their current fees are and where they fit in on that estimate, for example?
Sure. So the cost, the cost that is on the presentation is essentially the cost that was given to us by our current hauler, which is American Disposal. So it is a combination of costs between the hauling, and we are guesstimating at their tip fees. Currently, we do not have any data from any condo buildings at all. So we were just essentially kind of guessing at what their their tonnage would be for the year. And that's how we kind of came up with that buffer.
No, so that makes sense, and I think without prejudging it in any way, it would make sense for us to kind of just see as a data point, like what these 3 condo buildings are paying for their, solid waste services right now, and then whether it's, we might be able to, as Councilmember Snyder said, negotiate sort of a better rate for them if they were part of sort of the city-wide system, or it may be, looking at something and saying, look, if they were to move to a cart the size of the library cart, for example, what would an additional pickup mean within sort of the same cycle that occurs at the library or the community center in terms of like the same size truck, the same size cart, so you're not adding any pickup, you're adding a location or 3 locations to the pickup cycle that's already happening based on the frequency that they may or may not need, given the size of the bin relative to their current system. But I think that's all I had. And I guess I hit every option. I would prefer, if we could, to not complicate this to a degree that we have to pay $200,000 in consultancy fees as opposed to paying $200,000 directly into a composting system.
That was my next point.
So, I mean, I would prefer that the takeaway or the direction from council not be, yes, let's go invest $200,000 in a plan, as opposed to let's see what manageable options may exist and additional data points we can get and what we might be able to implement that's like more manageable while still accomplishing shared goals that we have.
Just did I want, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to echo, that was the same thought I had. I'm like, we could pay for the composting bins to be implemented without going through a consultancy.
Okay.
Just dabbling.
I just had another thought. Can you go back to the slides, Sophie? The one that shows the chart for option 1. Because I think there's I don't think it's in there, it's just in the slides. What's crossing my mind is that here we go. Okay. So the people whose property value is $750,000 but have a $149 real estate tax reduction. Most of those people that live in condos fall in that $750,000 range. So they wouldn't have they would actually have just a negative $149 impact, because we wouldn't then be charging them the solid waste fee. We would be reducing the solid waste fee. So I feel like we need another line there. Does that make sense? If we think about someone who lives in a condo, and this was brought to us by people who live in condos, who are saying, we're double paying. We're paying our real estate assessment rate taxes, and we're not getting the benefits, so we're also paying tipping fees already. So if we're gonna take it out of the tax rate, then those people would just have their taxes reduced by 2 cents. They wouldn't have an additional solid waste fee.
Yeah, except I guess, thinking for like somewhere like Winter Hill, like this could have a big impact on residents at Winter Hill who get trash service and often talk
It
about
could.
being cost burdened, for example.
Right, but
Yeah.
I just feel like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is true.
yeah.
But I feel like we need to acknowledge that the people who live in those 3 condo buildings, if we did option 1, would actually have a very large reduction with no additional added on,
That's right.
right?
Because they already pay for.
Because they're already paying for that anyway. So, so those people would indeed benefit from that. So that's the first thing. The second one is, could there be a way to just reduce the assessments on people that don't get trash picked up? So when we do the assessments every year, if you live in a condo, your assessment is reduced by X amount of dollars, and then you would pay less taxes because you're not getting trash service. So your assessment is just a little bit less.
You mean your real estate property value?
Yeah, your property value. So your property value is less because, and that would reduce what you're paying to make it more equal. I don't know if that's possible or not possible, but that would be another way to help the specific people who are asking for help.
I'll go out on a limb a little bit. That is the status quo, and if the market is rational, it is already priced in. But we can't, under Virginia law, tell the assessor to do something special other than record market sales and then make judgments on value based on those market sales.
Okay. So, but I do think that we do need to take into account that if we're talking about the equity, the people that specifically came to us with this need, this would be helping the people that live in any condo building, whether it's a mixed use or not mixed use. And I feel like we need to treat them equally and not say, well, you live in a mixed use condo building, so you still have to pay double. But these people live in an old condo building and they are going to get a benefit. That doesn't make sense to me.
Agreed.
So in my mind, I really think option one deserves a little bit more parsing out there to really figure out, like, who would it affect? Because if you live in a small Winter Hill townhouse, how much would that go up for you? And is there a way to make it more equity-wise? But I do think option one gets at the problem that we're trying to solve. I think option four just creates a whole giant raft of additional problems that we're bringing onto ourselves in an attempt to get to equity. We're adding more trash service for us. We're adding how much more work for Lonnie just to figure out how many different buildings are going to have their different sized dumpsters, and will it be twice a week or once a week? That will add a lot of additional costs that are going to go into the tax rate for all of us to pay for that. So I do feel like that option four just makes things so much more complicated than it needs to be, when the elegant solution is option one, with some more analysis on how to make sure that we aren't double dipping from some people's wallets. And then I really do like adding the organic cart. I think that would be a great addition as well. So those are my thoughts on that one.
Has everyone gone once already before I call on people again? Yes, go ahead, Justine.
Couple quick questions. Was Park Towers by right? Were there no proffers when Park Towers was first?
It was before that
So
age.
Park Towers was rezoned and built in 1963, and we don't have the paperwork on that. Then it converted to condo in 1983, and we actually have a search for any covenants that were associated with that. It wouldn't be unimaginable that the city council in 1983 would have said something about city services. And so that's why we have put out a request for those documents. I'm not sure we're going to find them, though.
Okay.
At least in the city files. If there's anything recorded, we might have a chance there.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and then a slightly separate question. Lonnie, this is on the page, solid waste volume in tons, page 6. Councilmember Snyder brought up leaves. I was wondering, why was there a huge increase in leaf collection in the past year?
It's a good harvest.
Herb, I will turn that over to you.
Thank you, Lonnie. So leaf collection is sort of a fluid collection. So there's no real substance to how we measure leaves. So you could have, I can tell you in 2022, we had a very early leaf fall, and we had leaves that fell early, but however, we didn't have the volume that we had last year. So last year we had a late leaf fall, and there was actually more. So every year, it really just depends. Because after leaf season, there are a lot of trees that still have leaves on them that we don't collect, and they end up after maybe mid-January, they end up going into the trash because we say we're done with them. So any leaves that you have, whether they're bagged or we ask you to bag them, take them off the curb, they go into the waste stream. So if we collect them, then we have those years that you have sort of rich years and lean years, right? And it's never a perfect science. I've been collecting leaves now for 20 years, and I've never really had it where it stables, right, where it gets stable. 2021, we had a lot of storms and we had a lot of trees that came down in the city. So our leaf collection that year was much less than, previous years or even going forward.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Debbie?
A couple of random questions on that. So if we had a third bin, back to your point, would that be kind of the compost crew size now bin, it's almost like a bucket versus the rollout bin, just in terms of people saying, I don't want 3 big bins. I don't have space for that. I don't want to have the mechanics of moving that. I'm envisioning the same size compost crew bucket when you say adding a third bin. Is that right?
So the 155 is the cost for 65-gallon bins. American Disposal can get us 35-gallon and 65-gallon, but if we were to get the 5-gallon bins that Compost Crew currently offers, there's no data or cost on that as of right now. So that's where the 155 came
65
from.
gallons
Is just
of organic matter. You'd have to have a lot of organic compostable diapers to fill up.
So I think-
A lot of watermelons, too.
So part of this is I think for purposes of putting this material together, we went with the 65-gallon bin because it's also intended to replace what people are doing for yard waste today. So if y'all get the little brown bags and put the stickers on them or whatever, some people do a bunch of that, some people do less of it, but if you're doing that on a regular basis, a much bigger cart makes sense. So that's an element we can dig further into it, but I don't think it's intended to be just a compost crew size bucket for everybody because that wouldn't work.
Correct.
For the yard waste portion of the game.
Yeah, I guess
So part of the reason this is more affordable, with the way it's been presented to you tonight is it's replacing not only the compost crew subsidy, but it's also replacing some of the yard waste pickup that we do today, right? There's a truck that drives around the city that picks up yard waste from everybody today. So to add the second or the third stops to everybody's home, we got a lower cost because I think the trucks, at least in some volume, are already here. So anyway, some additional thoughts.
Okay, we can continue to talk about that. With the right sizes, doesn't have to be decided tonight. I was just trying to envision the questions that people will have immediately.
And I just found that I also think it's going to be less desirable to have a 65-gallon yard waste cart versus kind of a smaller cart that you just feel isn't, this giant depth of stuff you're throwing into all the time, right? Yeah. But anyway.
And in theory, so, you start with you get more people to compost, you can throw away less. We currently have an option of a 35-gallon, could people, I'm just thinking about as we continue to do more environmental education, we talk about our community energy action plan, can we get people turning in the 65 gallons for 35-gallon? Sometimes when you have 3 other people leave your household, you might have a lot less trash and, that just might be another, whether that's it's a subconscious incentive, right, to reduce your trash. I was like, well, let me sign up. I'll trade mine in tomorrow. Do we have that is current option? When people buy a new house, they have an option to get 35?
Correct.
It's been so long since I got my house. All right, I think there's some education we can do on that too that would continue to help just chip away at our community energy action plan. And then this is a non sequitur, but while I have you on the solid waste, we had some citizens who I gave our business cards to report problems, report challenges with the Winter Hill dumpsters that were then replaced, and they were ecstatic that this process worked. So thank you to whomever, Lonnie, I don't know if that was you or whomever changed out their dumpsters, and they got the message through the right channels. It was the first time that I had a full cycle of an actual citizen request through that program work, and it worked quickly, and they were super happy and called me within days. So kudos to everybody on that full cycle change. And those are my random things. Oh, no, the last thing was on the leaves. I feel like we need to have a little asterisk on that sign, to your point about, like, if you look at my yard, for instance, I've got a leave the leaves sign out, but if you look at the mature trees there, you couldn't drive in the driveway, you couldn't, like, go anywhere if we didn't remove some of the leaves. So I feel like some, like, people, even if you're leaving most of your leaves and you still have some on the curb, like, it's still making a difference on what goes into the stream. And, you know,
It's not
might
all
need,
or
like, a
nothing.
little banner that has an asterisk on it, like, leave most of the leaves, leave as many leaves as you can.
Yeah, there
I'm
might
still
be-
gonna have a pile of leaves in my curb, but I am leaving a lot of them.
There might be some messaging there where it's, actually Mark Gross said it's leave some leaves, not leave all the leaves. So, and even if you leave a few more leaves than you did last year, it's still better than.
Yeah, so hopefully when we look at this bar chart next year, there'll be, you know, could be notable impact. But to your point, it fluctuates so much, it's hard to have causation, but it's still understood that it's got to be better than putting them all on the curb and calling them away. Thank you for that random
Okay.
smattering of
Okay,
comments.
I will go now. I'm glad Mary Beth mentioned the comment about treating everyone who lives in multifamily similarly. I think it would be pretty weird to explain to people, well, you're in an old mixed-use building versus a new one, or you're a by right building versus special exception. I think in general, people live in multifamily, and I think as we add more multifamily with our housing stock being split 50-50 now, I think it's important to think about that equity element. So anything that treats kind of multifamily differently, I think feels a little weird to me. I agreed with, I think both Debbie and Aaron had said, can we not pay $200,000 for the consultant and start with the compost option? So look more closely at option 3 as kind of an initial step that would help us hopefully divert more solid waste into organic composting. My second thought had to do with going back to kind of the goals and principles. So if it is about equity and transparency, I personally really like pay-as-you-throw. I know it's more complicated to administer, but it is a lot more intuitive, and I think it incents the right behavior for people, which ultimately is what we want if we want to reduce and reuse our trash. Instead of going to the larger 65-gallon bin, you could also just not drag your bins out as frequently. The Hardys only drag them out twice a month because we compost a lot, so that helps. And so that's one way to kind of encourage people to reduce what they use. But I, in general, like the idea of, while it needs more exploration, of encouraging people to pay for their share of their services, right? And so as the only person up here with a household of 5, and we generally make a fair amount of trash, but because we compost, we really only have trash every other week. And so I think it's important for people to think about their personal behaviors and what they can do to help with our climate goals. So that probably needs more time to explore and potentially need a consultant, although I do balk at the idea of spending $200,000 for that if we can more quickly implement the composting option. My third question is, how do others do it? So I know Arlington moved to curbside composting with, do other people have a flat fee? Do people build it into their tax rate? I think it'd be interesting to look at how neighboring jurisdictions have solved this. I'm guessing we are not the only ones.
Well, we can bring you a chart with all those options. I'm looking at her because I know he has some experience with 2 of our neighbors and how they handle it. I don't know if you are prepared to speak to it or.
I mean, I can speak to it a little bit. So, having previously worked for the County of Arlington and the City of Alexandria, I know in Alexandria, this is part of the household solid waste rate, so it's all tied in to one. In Arlington, when I was there, which was a while ago, it was the same. It was tied into the household solid waste rate. And so
Flat fee?
It was a flat fee, right. So whether it was leaves, snow, any type of collection, all of that was paid for out of one fee. It was sort of cleaner at that time because the people didn't have, you knew what you were paying at the beginning of the year or whenever your tax deadline was, you knew what you were paying. So it just, everybody knew when it was due and what it was.
Got it. Were we the first jurisdiction to implement stormwater that was variable based on how much impervious surface we had? Which seemed like a really equitable way to do it, right? Like if you have a lot of asphalt and a lot of impervious surface, you're charged more because you're creating more runoff. To me, this feels very similar. Like if you're incurring extra costs in the system, you might have to pay more.
We weren't the first in Virginia, we were the first in Northern Virginia.
And I know it was bumpy because I remember getting the notification about it, but I think lots of other people have started moving to that model since then, right?
If I might, there are differences, though. This is taking away a service that's now currently being offered versus the stormwater fee was necessary because of a dramatically increased need.
I guess I also on the comparing to neighboring jurisdictions, I also think like we should be careful on economies of scale issues and like shouldn't necessarily say, well, just because Fairfax or Arlington or Alexandria is doing something versus like if we're gonna compare, then maybe we want to compare to like towns that are more like our size and thinking about what are kind of like the expectations in terms of municipal services, or what are the expectations given the tax rates that people are paying in different jurisdictions. So if you're paying a much lower tax rate, maybe you don't feel kind of the extra fee as much as if you're already paying a much higher tax rate than some of the neighboring jurisdictions and you're getting a small reduction in your tax rate, but you're getting assessed a fee that brings you overall higher than the high rate you were already paying, given that we hear so often from, you know, residents who say they're cost burdened. I just don't want to oversimplify kind of that by saying, you know, we can easily implement it because larger neighbors are doing it already.
I was just asking to understand how the region does it, not necessarily to compare ourselves. Can we go back to the slide that shows the pay-as-you-throw? I think it had the chart of the cost of what it would look like potentially for like the range from $750,000 to $2.5 million home.
I think that'd be slide 11.
So there's an assumption here that obviously if you're in a property that's assessed at $2.5 million, you are in a larger household that's generating more trash, right? So that's kind of the first assumption. There could be a situation where you're a two-person household in a $2.5 million home and you actually don't create that much trash. So we're doing this based on the size of the bin, not on the size of the home. So I think that's an important distinction, right? Because ultimately it is again tied back to how much trash you're generating versus the home. So the concerns about, burden on people, like think about other ways to divert your trash or, create less trash. Okay. So to summarize, I think you heard general support for exploring composting, which is what I think I saw several head nods around, and then we're kind of split on next steps with what to do about do nothing or explore a different payment option between, I think what's called option number 1 and 2. Is that
There's no option that addresses all mixed, no option that addresses all mixed, all condos that are,
Well, I think 4 had some,
but that's accepting.
it's complicated, right? 4 was the one where you provide service to multifamily, but then there was complications between mixed use versus
Right.
straight multifamily without mixed use.
And that's what I'm saying, if you're treating them all equally, meaning, to your points, that you own a place, it doesn't matter if you're in an old mixed use or a new mixed use or whatever, but there's no option contemplated for doing that. It's too complicated, that's what I hear. Is that right?
Yeah, I think option 4 in general is, we're a little daunted by the complexity of how to get into that new business. Even the idea of trying to do joint procurement, that seems very difficult.
I guess for option 4, I would at least ask to not take it off the table in terms of the information gathering of just finding out what are those 3 buildings paying, so we have kind of an idea of what that cost is. Because you could say there's a difference between even a tax rebate versus if it were $15,000 instead of offering that service, is that potentially the city could absorb the cost of the service even if it didn't roll it into its own contract? I don't know. But so, there are different ways to think about it. But I think we should at least, have 3 pieces of data that seem easy enough to get without launching into that whole further examination of the option.
A tangential question, Lonnie. Commercial composting has come up among our businesses. I know that some of them had talked to Compost Crew, and I don't know where those conversations ever went, but is that something that they also offer to our small businesses in town?
Yes, so when we did the contract that was effective in July, I made sure to ask for them to build in some type of a discounted cost for commercial. So it is something that they can sign up for, and it is offered to them at a discounted cost.
Has anyone signed up?
That I do not know. I know that Lazy Mike's uses Compost Crew and Clarendon Dawns, but I'm unsure as to if they are using it under our contracted rate or if they're just paying whatever price the composting is.
It's great. We should let the people know that we actually have a negotiated discount rate, maybe through the
Sure,
chamber.
we can do outreach on that.
Through the chamber or through somebody else to let them know that this is something the city offers. Great, thank you. Any final questions or comments?
Just on my question about people who would benefit by not having to pay the 2 cents on their tax rate, and my question is, I guess, those condo buildings, when you're doing this analysis, can we understand how many people live in those condo buildings, and of the people who have the lowest assessments, how many people would benefit from this, I guess, is the question. If we have 7 condo buildings or 5 condo buildings, how many homeowners are going to benefit from that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That benefit was not put into the chart. There are other, everybody would benefit from that 2 cent reduction, commercial property owners who aren't referenced in this as well. If we just honed in on condo owners, we could probably make some averages and show that as well.
Right. I mean, if you look at the assessments.
It would still be leaving out other classes of people who would benefit
Right. Yeah. Anyway, just maybe a nuanced understanding of what that benefit
Right.
would be of reducing the tax rate and then changing it to a fee for those who use the service.
So, Mayor, I will just observe it. This has been a wide range of comments, and I'm not sure that staff has anything close to guidance from this discussion, which is a concern. We do have, I think, strong, pretty widespread support for the option 3 on the composting service. On this question about whether we should proceed with developing a RFP, we wouldn't necessarily issue it, but that's a fair amount of work just in of itself, and we know it's going to be expensive. We also know going down this path that this is going to sort of open up a whole lot of community discussion, and so I am a bit concerned about going down the path without sort of clarity of the council in terms of where you really want to push this and what direction. And I'm not hearing that from this discussion. So we could, one conversation Sally and I have been having is, about having votes at work sessions where council can give firm votes with direction to staff. Otherwise, we're reading tea leaves and making a lot of assumptions. Would there be any appetite for some straw polling on options, just so we can see if there's some clarity on that, or?
Sure.
Or we could develop the composting option, but set the other options aside for a period of time, just to let that sort of, let people think about that a little bit more before we take on that scope of work.
Does taking on the compost option cost us $200,000 with a consultant?
Well, we would probably flesh it out a little bit more in terms of what that program would look like, and come back with a strategy on what implementation would be. I think Ms. Marchetti, did you think we needed, if we just did composting, would we need consulting services to roll that service out, do you think? Or what are your thoughts on that?
If it's just option 3, adding that organic bin, I would ask for grace of time. But if given the time, then I don't think for that option, no. If we're implementing that as a standalone, I guess I should say, no.
No consult,
I think we'll be
consulting,
able to do it.
200,000 for consulting services would not be needed.
Correct.
Okay.
Seems to me like that's a good interim step, because I do think that would give an indication of how much behaviors change, how much trash usage changes. And I think all of these options don't get at the original issue in my mind of ensuring that everybody who lives in those condos is treated the same. And that sounds administratively very difficult, and what sounds to be part of the most complicated part of this process. So, I mean, if you want to go through each one as a straw, that whatever works, but I would just net that out from my perspective, that I would support moving forward with the organic bins. If we can roll that out within a year, have another year that you study to see what that does to each of the volumes of that. Maybe with the Leave the Leaves, we also have some increase in, maybe there are some behavioral changes that net some different policy options we want to consider in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. That's 1 out of 7 people's opinion.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think it accomplishes, if I go back to the original goals we talked about, which was reduce our solid waste, more transparency, more equitable, I think it solves one, but does not tackle the other 2 at all. So I'm fine with that as an interim step, but it doesn't really address what we originally heard from the people at Park Towers and other condo communities.
I'm
So,
What was the second one you said? You said,
It was, we wanted to reduce solid waste,
Yeah.
right? And we wanted more transparency and more equitable kind of trash.
So I like number 3. I think we should definitely go with the organic, but I do think we should explore option 1 a little more to really flesh out what the financial consequences are to the whole community. Because, again, that was the original reason why we started to look at this, was the questions by condo owners.
You're removing from the tax rate and just doing a flat fee, or removing from a tax rate and then do pay as you throw?
No, I think the first step should be removing from the tax rate and doing a flat fee, or more information about that, so we have more specifics, so that we know who will have the biggest effect. Where's the equity piece of it?
So if the takeaway is to continue to develop the composting program and go back to the drawing board on the transparency and equity issues and continue that thought process and come back for another discussion on that before we launch a consultancy, certainly. We might have some other ideas possibly that come out of some additional discussion. I don't know what those are right now, but it's possible that something new could come up.
Can I ask on option 1, just like for information purposes, did you like estimate, like take into your calculus the lost like commercial revenues that are gonna come from the reduction overall in the assessed rate?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a basic calculation of taking that cost structure of 1.2 million, 1.12 million, and then dividing that by $564,000, which is what 1 penny generates with commercial and residential together.
Okay. Is that more helpful now?
Yeah, I'm generally in agreement. I want to make clear, though, that I oppose breaking this out as a separate fee. And I think, other ways to approach the equity issues should be explored way before that. Thanks.
Okay.
may I ask one question before I'm done? So researching more for adding that third organic cart, but the way that it was presented, there is a fee associated with it. So, do you want us to continue building it with this additional fee in mind, or leave it out?
So Lonnie, this is Andy. I think what we would do is go do some more homework, and it would come back to you all as part of the FY26 budget discussion. So that would,
okay, that's fine.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because you'd have to net out, yeah. What you're saying is that it's $41 per year in this current, to just add the organic bin. Every household would pay $41 more.
That was 18.
No. So if we're just doing,
That's what I'm looking
so if
at.
we're just doing option number 3, the city would need to pay another $55,000 a year in operating costs, and we would need some amount of money for bins, which we would discuss further, I think, based on tonight's discussion, but those are the two things. So I think based on kind of the homework and things we need to do that Lonnie was talking about, I think the earliest that we'd come back to y'all with that would be in the FY26 budget.
Yeah, you're saying there'd be like a one-time outlay for purchasing bins, and then you'd need to have the $18 times the 3,000 households is a $54,000 like recurrence in your operating
Correct.
costs for every year that you're doing this. Yeah, okay.
And we'd refine the numbers and do some additional homework before presenting that in the spring.
But if it's in the tax rate, then it's just all calculated in with everything else that we're making decisions on.
That's right.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, council.
Thank you for your work on this, Lonnie.
Thank you. Good night.
And then the last item is discussion of council salaries and benefits. And our city attorney has put together the staff report on this, and I'll turn it over to the city attorney. Ms. Gillette.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Before you tonight is two subjects. One is the subject of council salaries, and the other is the subject of council benefits, similar to the employment benefits that city employees enjoy. And our recommendation is that that those two items most likely should be separated going forward, because there are very particular, adoption criteria under state code for salaries that don't necessarily apply to benefits. Certainly council can choose to keep those two topics running together in a single ordinance, but from a process perspective, it might make sense to separate them. The recommendation, tonight follows some recent state legislation that authorized a increase in council member salaries and those of mayors. The legislation is attached to the staff report and shows that for cities with a population under 15,000, the salary of mayor the maximum salary went from $11,500 to $21,000 annually, and the salary of council members went from $11,000 to $20,000 annually. It's possible because this ordinance could not be effective until 2026. I mean, the ordinance could be effective, I misstated that, but the salary increase could not be effective until 2026, which means it's possible that the city could be in a different bracket for population, and that bracket is only modestly different than the one I just cited. It would give a maximum salary of $22,000 to the mayor and a maximum salary of $21,000 to other council members. So the recommendation before you would be to develop a schedule for the consideration and adoption of these items. And we have crafted a motion which would not necessarily be adopted tonight because it's a work session, but would be recommended for adoption at council's meeting on October 28th. And that motion would direct staff to develop an analysis of the various employment benefits that could be made available to the city council, and then to schedule that analysis for delivery to council and consideration by council no later than the council meeting on February 24th of 2025. That's kind of presuming that you are, tying these to, the benefits and salary discussions. That's why that date's kind of far out there. It says, I further move that City Council direct staff to schedule the first reading of the salary ordinance for a date such that the public hearing occur no later than the last regular council meeting in May of 2025. And that is because of the timing requirements in the statute. The sequence of events has to be a public hearing, council vote, general election of council members, which does not occur this November, even though we have a special election. The next regular general election of council members is in November of 2025. The public hearing has to occur, and I believe the vote as well, 4 months before the general election. So really you have, I think the end of June is what I calculated. Yes, the end of June of 25 to get the salary adopted. And the effective date of the salary can only be effective as early as July 1st of the July following the general election in November 25, which puts the salary effective date at July 1 of 26. So, I know that's a lot and it's kind of way far out into the future, but you are approaching it at the right time. And I guess that's all I have to say. I've already gone over the fact that we believe it would be beneficial to separate salaries and benefits in terms of their ordinances, and the public hearing that you would need to have on salaries has to occur no later than May of 25 to enable the vote to occur by the end of, to ensure it occurs by the end of June of 25. That is it for the kind of the presentation. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sally. Who's got questions or comments on this one? So just a clarifying one for me. I think you had mentioned that if our population gets to the next bracket between 15,000 and 1999, I think, it goes up again. So is that, do we have to get that done through census, or I guess how do we know what data does the state code say we need to use?
Right, because you won't have necessarily a census. There is this provision in state code that I came across that says the city council has the authority to demand a count of its population through, I believe, the Commonwealth's attorney, if I'm remembering correctly, and that once it's requested has to be done. So we would have to, as we go through this ordinance, flesh that out more, how we would determine the population. I agree with that point completely.
Okay. Comments?
Madam Mayor, I had one question. I think we need a number on the benefits. If those benefits were maxed out for every member of City Council, what would be the cost? I know you can calculate it for employees, so I think that's very important in looking at that.
Yeah, I think 2 pieces of data, maxed out and actuals and projected maximum. So maximum, so you have a max min, and what actually occurred would be 3 data points, I guess. Well, we know minimum. Let me go back to 2 data points. Actuals and maximum expense.
Well, I think the first question is which one should council be eligible for, right? Because right now I think it's just health, but I think out of the menu that was offered, I think we looked at a staff recommendation at which ones, and then based on those, what are the values associated with those? Mary Beth?
And then I just wonder about the pension, because you don't vest in the pension for 5 years, right? So it would be.
Pension's not eligible.
I'll say that's not. Yeah.
Oh, it's not eligible, okay. But the 457 would be.
Well, it is a little confusing because it
Yeah.
says council is authorized under Virginia code to receive any or all benefits that are provided to the city by its employees. And it lists pensions,
there's 4 lists.
457, health insurance, and FSA.
Yeah, so the city's pension plan, however, is a separate
Full-time.
legal document with the terms, and under the adopted pension plan, council is not eligible because of your point of the temp and term. You don't meet that definition. The 457 and the 401A would require some additional research to verify under our record keeping the eligibility. Okay. Most likely eligible.
And I would just chime into what Cindy's saying. I don't I don't know the process for amending any of those pension plans, but I know we have the retirement board, and most likely it would have to go through that group. But if that is something that should be explored, then it could be raised in this discussion, and it could be explored and an answer returned to the council.
And that is correct. The pension plan is an animal of council that adopts it based on the recommendation of the retirement board. That said, we will have to do legal and fiduciary and valuation oversight for it, because you'd be significantly changing the definition of eligible and the overall valuation of how much contribution needs to go in to the pension plan to keep us over 100% funded by adding additional. So
Personally, I think it's odd to have if you have to have a 5-year period and you're elected for a 4-year period to anticipate that as a benefit. Yeah. However, I think in the other, like a 457, it's an annual, right? You have a job for a year, you can contribute to that. So like that makes more sense to me. Pension doesn't make sense to me, but the other 3 do, because there are annual plans that you sign up for and can have a finite period. Just in terms of, I'm not saying, just make more sense to be discussing than pension.
yeah, and for the pension, we need to start with a significant legal review, and there'll be costs. So I would support where you're heading now, and we can keep certainly the other as a future option.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think zooming out even further, like, there's a more fundamental question in my mind about, like, we're elected officials and should we be likening ourselves to city employees? And I think that there's a difference between us as elected officials and city employees, and kind of under state law, you know, we may or may not be able to grant certain benefits, but should think about, like, why would we be doing that? Or does that, you know, change the character of sort of the role? And does it sort of make council more like enmeshed with the city as opposed to kind of like a governance oversight responsibility? And so I'm not like prejudging the benefits, you know, issue. I do think it makes sense to treat salaries and benefits differently and under different ordinances, and that it does make sense for sort of transparency purposes to have an ordinance governing benefits as opposed to a sort of administrative authority governing benefits for elected officials, and that we should, you know, kind of think critically about, if we're going to have benefits, how do you classify council members, and, you know, what that looks like relative to like actual employees of the city government who you're providing benefits to hopefully, you know, incentivize or create kind of lasting relationships, or kind of provide incentives to stay with the city sort of over time.
Okay, other thoughts? Dave?
I guess I had one more thought. Maybe I didn't exactly hear the answer, but the one benefit that I thought really, in my view, ought to be given serious consideration is workers' compensation or independent contractor coverage of some kind, because if you're driving to a meeting and something happens when you're driving to a meeting, you're on your own now, right? Unless we're already covered because we're on city business. So I think that's something that ought to be clarified, because that's a potential for a catastrophic loss that might not otherwise be covered.
Yeah, the city does, under our Versa insurance, carry public officials' liability insurance, so that I can confirm for sure you're covered. And I believe if you're on city business or workers' comp, but I'd like to
If you could
follow
confirm
up
that,
with
yeah.
Sally and Versa on that.
Because we all have to go various places as part of the city job, and I don't think that's a risk that you assume necessarily.
And I would add, when you're driving your personal vehicle on city business, though, the Versa insurance will not cover your automobile. Your personal insurance will cover that. Our public officials' liability would cover everything else. And that's one thing we're very careful with our city employees as well, because if they're doing their personal vehicle on city business, the first insurance is your personal.
Okay.
Okay, it's a good question. Other thoughts? Okay. I feel like we just took a vote on this one. I had to look back. I think it was 2022.
It was summer of 2022 before election of 2022.
And then just went into effect 2024. No, it was 2022. We voted on it.
We had to vote before the last.
Before the 2023 election.
Right.
And then it went into effect July 1st, 2024, just now.
Right.
3 months ago.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. Okay, I don't see other questions or comments.
Just a thought that you have this on this calendar for October 28th. I'm wondering if we can push it later, because we have an election in November, and it's the kind of thing where you might want to have a full council to be able to vote on.
Sorry, I'm kind of lost on where we are. So, I mean, you said we sort of have consensus on this, and I guess I'm more interested in hearing other people's thoughts. Like, it seems as though we have consensus on potentially treating this as two separate ordinances, but I don't know. I would benefit from, I think, more discussion on like the salary cap and what we're talking about is a potential
what's
salary
proposed right now,
increase,
as
if
I
anything.
understand it, is that we would be directing staff to look into benefits and then propose drafting up an ordinance that would then be voted on in June, but before June 30th, 2025, I think is the date. Right, Sally? On
later.
salary.
Correct.
So two
And
separate.
the ordinance that we attached to the staff report had included salaries at the maximum allowed under law. Regardless of whether you're under 15,000 in population or over 15,000 in population. And so that the amount should be discussed by council. You don't need to reach a consensus tonight. The direction that you would be giving staff to develop the ordinance and the public hearing schedule would be given to us by vote on October 28th at your meeting on that date. We don't need consensus tonight, but if you could start thinking about what salary you would favor and be, willing to give maybe some more direction on that on the 28th, that would be helpful. But even then, if you want to change your mind, you have, many months afterwards to, in a public hearing and a final vote in the first half of 25 to, to think about this.
And that October 28th date is where I agree with Mary Beth that it feels appropriate to have the full council seated. So maybe we want to wait till November 12th, if that's the first regular meeting after the general election. So we have 7 of us to give that direction to staff.
Yes, there's no urgency, and we could do that.
Okay. And you want to discuss the salary part more, Erin?
I mean, I think it makes sense, like, if just in the last year we went from whatever it is, 9,200 to 11,000, and then you're talking about a salary increase from 11,000 to like 20,000, you're talking about an 80% increase from like the current to 20,000. And so, I think it just warrants a discussion of, what's the purpose of the salary? What, do we want to accomplish by the salary? And then what kind of, if any, increase makes sense in terms of the salary and where that puts us relative to, other jurisdictions our size. And so, again, I think it's sort of about like council and kind of what it, what the demands of the position are and kind of what makes sense in thinking about this as like a stipend versus a salary, for example. And like
I
the
can address
attendance
that. I
benefits
think
that-
it should be a stipend that provides an opportunity for as many people as possible to access the opportunity. And what I mean by that is if you have childcare you have to pay for every meeting you go to, and that's 1 to 2 to 3, sometimes more meetings per week, that you can afford to pay childcare to support that. Or if it's parental care that you need to be caring for. I want it to not preclude somebody from being on council. Nobody's going to be able to live on, whether it's $11,000 or $20,000, this is obviously not a salary one could live on, and nobody's doing it to make money, to be a large income earner. If you did this by the number of hours that you spend on council, I mean, it's pennies, if that, per hour, as everybody here puts in a tremendous amount of time. People are doing it for their civic duty. So I think that that's my goal, and I haven't run the math backwards to see like what actually would cover that. And it also is, you got to pay for gas or bus or whatever to get here. You have to pay for maybe other missed opportunity. Like there are opportunity costs to taking this position, and I want to ensure that as many people run as possible, and that the expense of doing the job is not precluding people from running. So that's like my overarching philosophy, and I also think that is where I stand on benefits as well. If the world's changing, it's much more of a gig economy than there was before. The health insurance isn't offered to everybody, not everybody has that opportunity, and if that's the reason that somebody can do this job as well, I think that's an important, and you don't have to take it, you don't have to take the salary, you don't have to take the insurance, but providing those as an opportunity for someone who really wants to run and maybe provides a different voice or just we all have unique voices, making sure that all those unique voices are heard. That's kind of my philosophy, but I don't have it like tonight. I think it should be $14,650 number in my mind, but yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no,
part
that's
of the
what I
discussion.
mean. Like, yeah, and I
That's where I
agree, yeah.
stand. I have a very passionate feeling about that.
No, and I get all that, and we've had this conversation before about leave and caregiving responsibilities and, those sorts of costs that add up. I'm just saying that I'm putting it out there that it should be a conversation that we have about what the right number is for what purposes. And, is it the salary aspect of the job that's keeping people from running, or is it sort of other aspects of the job that make it seem, much more difficult to do that keeps people from running?
I
And so
imagine
think
it's a like
worthwhile,
everything, it's a
have
combination
that
of all,
conversation.
combination of all of those things. But we have control over one,
Right.
right? This is the one we have control over. So that's why and we haven't had this opportunity, like it was $9,000 salary for
It's 2007. I looked it up.
2007 to 2022. So this hasn't even been a conversation we could have. So it is kind of strange to go from 9 to 11 and all of a sudden have $9,000 more of a range to play with.
Yeah, I get that, and it's
but
interesting.
To discuss,
Yeah.
why it happened like that. It was obviously suppressed really for decades. So just like anything, catching up on whether it's teacher salary or our employees, general government employees, it's kind of catching up on the elected official salaries as well, but 9,000 in 1 year is, it's a big jump. So like the teachers or like the general government, maybe it's a staged, planned increase, so it's also not a huge budget hit. I mean, as a percentage of the budget, it's not a huge budget hit, even if it were 9,000 times 7. However, the perception of making that big jump, it seems painful, but if you look at it over the history and you were to chart out where it's been artificially low, in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I was looking at the ordinance because, the salary cap applies differently to cities, for example, of different sizes versus towns in Virginia. And under the ordinance, it seemed, under, Virginia code, towns actually don't have salary caps. And so I thought it was interesting to look at sort of what towns nearby were paying, and they generally, were in the $14,000 to $15,000 range. Interestingly enough, just in January 2024, Vienna, raised their salaries, but they only raised them to $11,250 for the mayor and $7,500 for council members. Culpeper I don't know, like Herndon, for example, went from 6,000 to 16,000 for their mayor, 15,000 for their council members. Leesburg seems to be around 16,000 for their mayor, 15,000 for council members. So I'm just saying, like, kind of where numbers seem to be in places that haven't dealt with salary caps, but are thinking about kind of like what makes sense budget-wise for council, for example.
Towns are pretty different
They
budgets.
may
than
have
us.
dealt with salary caps, though.
They don't.
They may be capped at where they were the last time. Right? Whatever they have a larger population than we do, so they may have been able to, where we were at 11, they might be at 16.
No, I'm saying towns don't get capped at all under
Oh, I
Virginia
see, I see.
code. Yeah.
Towns can
But
do
I'm saying,
whatever
at
they
the end of
want.
the day, I'm not taking issue with the
Yourself
salary
200,000.
increase. I'm talking about sort of like,
Where it should be.
yeah, where it should be and thinking about, council.
Yeah, and I think we said this when we took the vote in 2022. I think in general, for me, I guess we've talked about wanting to attract more diverse opinions. So like Debbie, I think this is, we don't want this to be something that people can afford because they're independently wealthy or have the most flexible jobs. And so if this is one of the things that we can remove as a barrier to make it easier for people to serve, I think this is something, an option we should consider.
If I might, there's one other consideration, which is what is the nature of the job? Is the job fundamentally a volunteer job where you come forward from the community and you return to the community? Or is it intended to be a job? And if so, when you have a city manager form of government, is that sort of salary justified?
I don't
Does the
think,
job
I don't think anybody would
justify-
do this job as a complete
Does the job
volunteer.
justify that amount? And what do the citizens want? Do they feel that it's warranted?
Good question.
These are all just questions.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of where I was going with my questions.
When I came on and realized how much time people spent, like if someone were to ask you how many hours a week do you spend on this role, I mean, I don't think 30 hours is unreasonable, probably average what everybody spends on that. And for 4 years, is somebody going to do a volunteer job to spend 30 hours plus or minus? I don't know. And it doesn't seem to be like, maybe in the history of Falls Church City Council, has anybody used it as a springboard for like, I don't see people using it as like a political springboard. I see it's community, it's people who've come from the community who want to serve the community, and for the most part, even when they're off council, stay in the community and continue to be engaged in boards and commissions and volunteering services. So that's how I see it, the job, like it's an actual job.
But I guess that gets back to what I was saying, like, should it be a job? And if it becomes a job that like requires that much time, then there's like a whole nother segment of the community that you basically exclude from like serving on council. Because you can't have a job and be on council at that point. So that's what I mean about like, what,
It's at
what
that
makes
tipping
sense.
point, in my perspective, it's at a tipping point.
And that's why I think it's like a reflection as to kind of, council and how we're structured, or sort of what it is we're taking on as council versus what's like properly the role of the city to accomplish with our oversight, for example. That just, I think the conversation about incentivizing people to serve is it's related, but it's also a different conversation from just like the salary increase. And so I don't think the incentivizing people to serve is solely related to the amount that you're paying them.
I completely agree.
So
I'm not saying it's solely, it's a factor, it's a factor over which we have control. I don't have control over the outside market forces and how many hours people have to work in their other jobs or, anything else like that, but.
We can make this a more attractive option for someone to choose to do this. Okay, other thoughts? Okay, I think the only thing we heard, at least me and Mary Beth suggested we punt on this till the November 12th meeting, Sally? If that's fine. for you.
Yes, is there a consensus for that on council?
I
You'll
agree.
really- Okay.
Okay, so November 12th it is. We will bring this back to you, and it might help. Certainly, we don't need to wait till February 24th to bring back the benefit information. It might help us to know if you, like, how many meetings for discussion you think I know it might be hard to judge right now, but do you think we should be thinking that this is a 2 to 3 meeting discussion item, the benefits, or 1 to 2?
One? I think one.
Just one?
I think one feels sufficient, at least for me.
With the data,
Yeah,
one
if
is
you, if you have the
sufficient.
data on which
Right.
ones you think we should be eligible for, what the cost might be, I
Yeah,
think we can
okay.
take care of this in one.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to schedule then, unless there's anything else left on this item. Sally?
No, I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Since we don't have a mayor's meeting on Wednesday, let's take care of the schedule request.
All right, if the council would like, I can go through the schedule. Does everybody have the schedule in front of you? There was a stack of them on the table outside. If you don't have it, it might be easier if we
I don't have my computer. Oh, you
pause,
have it?
let people grab one.
I have it on.
Oh, well,
It's online.
Linked on the agenda
It's
too?
linked on the agenda.
yeah, Sophie's got it up on the screen as well, so that should do it.
Anybody else need one?
Can't forget my requests.
So we have a legislative committee tomorrow morning at 8:30. We will not have the meeting on the 9th then for the normal mayor's agenda meeting. We'll strike that. And then appointments committee at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. The VML conference is this coming weekend. We also have Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday, which is a holiday in the city. October 18th, we'll have the Budget and Finance Committee, and we'll be discussing sort of having a preliminary discussion of a budget amendment number 1, which we'll have on the work session on the 21st. The hotel tax ordinance, there was some state code changes that cause us to need to make a technical correction to our local hotel tax. The parklet naming discussion, actually, I think there's been a request to move that to November.
Yes.
That would go to, I think, November 4th. That's right. And Title VI policy and the annual Falls Church Shelter Agreement would be on a consent preview. A dinner with Alexandria and Arlington would be on October 23rd at 6:30 p.m. On the 28th, our regular meeting, we have a series of proclamations. We would have first reading on the budget amendment, the commercial parking item, the extension of the West Falls senior component, 30-day extension, the hotel tax technical correction, and then the 2 consent items. The November 4th work session, Saigon Boulevard renaming, honorary renaming, the sewer agreement with Fairfax County, accessory dwellings, discussion of code text, as well as an initiating resolution. We'll have the quarterly CIP report and the quarterly council priorities update. And we'll discuss the 2025 General Assembly legislative program. Cindy, you see that we have that on the 4th of November, which is a little early, yeah.
Yes.
November 12th, the reception for the new council member at 6:30, swearing in ceremony, proclamation for Trans Day of Remembrance and Transgender Awareness, budget amendment, second reading, the initiating resolution for accessory dwellings, and first reading on the text for for accessory dwellings for a code amendment. The Saigon Boulevard honorary renaming, and the adoption of the ledge program. And then a second reading on the technical correction for the hotel tax.
Can I ask quickly?
Mm-hmm.
On the November 4th work session. All right, on the November 4th work session for the 2025 General Assembly Legislative Program, is that where we may possibly discuss more the possible 15.2, 2304, like if we were to try to get included? And will we kind of have information about how that kind of intersects with like our special exception criteria, for example, and if it like shifts kind of how we think about density to like a different model versus the special exception model? Because it's like basically for anything with an elevator over 4 stories, we're capped under the current version. And so this would allow us to apply like a density bonus program to bigger buildings where we can't currently do so. So I'm just wondering how they like interrelate.
Well, they certainly do interrelate, and what I'm envisioning that we'd be able to do is just have some discussion about how others have used this authority. But City of Fairfax recently it was named, City of Charlottesville was named in 2020. Those are kind of your two most up-to-date jurisdictions that we've been, at the staff level, reading up on, and we'd want to share what we've learned in terms of how they've used that authority. I don't know, Cindy or Sally, if you have some other thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have been doing research so we can do that comparison. The legislative process, of course, is a specific track, and it's to give the city more local authority, and you have the choice whether and how to do it versus the restriction you have. So it's mirroring state authority for a goal and a vision with all the other stuff that roll into it. Most of the other localities that we've started looking at, it's very this section's very specific to affordable housing and your density, and it specifically says it doesn't override or supersede your other land use and zoning and so forth. So we'd marry them, but
Got it. So it's like another, right, something else in the toolbox.
Correct.
And then it's this, for the city to determine kind of if it has that tool, how
to
you
use it.
use it relative to your other tools or code provisions.
And we have a lot of good models from the other localities that are utilizing it now, and it eliminates the issues that you had when we were trying to do T-zones and your other initiatives while balancing a very restrictive ratio. And it does affect, this section would allow single-family detached, attached, and multifamily, so it allows you to look more holistically, but it doesn't require you to change zoning districts or other requirements within that underpinning. And tomorrow at the Legislative Committee meeting, we will be discussing this as a topic and sort of the legislative process, because I met with Senator Sleeman and Delegate Simon this afternoon, so we'd have the process, as it were, for discussion tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right, then continuing then on the second page and looking ahead to
Added the salary benefits discussion instead.
to the 12th. That's right. So that's just the motion, not necessarily the policy discussion. November 18th, we'll just note November 15th, we'd have a Budget and Finance Committee meeting there, and we're anticipating that we would begin starting to talk about financial policies at that point. November 18th work session. So the General Assembly State Code change summary, that's really a look backwards at the last session of the General Assembly and just looking at assessing any new authorities that we've either been granted or have had taken away from us. And so we can build that into the council's plan about any changes we want to make locally based on those state changes from last year. The fiscal or financial policies, discussion and review. The public facilities chapter of the comp plan, and an initiating resolution for that comp plan amendment. Then the 25th, right before Thanksgiving, the Fairfax County Sewer Agreement, the action on the initiating resolution for the public facilities chapter of the comp plan, and then a resolution on the financial policies. The December 2nd work sessions would be a joint session with the school board for FY26 budget planning and a discussion of FY26 budget guidance. And then at the last meeting of the calendar year, budget guidance resolution, fiscal policies resolution, and would kick things off at the beginning of that meeting with the Chet DeLong Library Service Award. We do have some things to plug in that we will do before we have our next agenda meeting before the meeting on the 21st, including the towing ordinance changes and a number of these things that are listed at the bottom.
One of the ones that I exchanged messages with Wyatt on that we had talked about was just Complete Streets and Vision Zero.
That's right.
And so that's one that needs to get added back in. And then a breakfast day too. That's good memory. I knew there was something else.
Quarterly staff breakfast.
Wyatt, did you catch that? I'm not sure if that's a clerk's thing or if that's out of the city manager's office.
I have been viewing it as a clerk's thing. I think the clerk might be viewing it as a city manager thing. We'll get that straight. I have been doing a city managers meetup where we don't bring food, so we're not as much fun as the mayor's event. But we have just sort of a round table where people can come in and talk policy or what's happening in the city. That next one is on November 7th. And since everyone's invited to that, it might be good to have a little buffer either well in advance of that or a little bit of time after that, just so we don't have two that are kind of right on top of each other.
My only suggestion was somewhere in the community centers, given that they're going to
Right.
move. And so given that we've been trying to
That'd be
move the
good.
breakfast
Yeah,
somewhere, so you all tell us the time and we're happy to
excellent.
talk to employees.
Well, the last one, I think people enjoyed it very much, so
Great.
look forward to that. I will talk with Celeste and we'll talk with you tomorrow on
Great.
getting that scheduled.
Thank you.
I had a few just questions. Just related to the budget. Can we have an update since when we ended the budget conversation, we had sort of talked about how much progress public safety, police department would be able to make on reaccreditation kind of on its own and sort of where we are with that or whether we may or may not see it kind of as part of the budget amendment conversation, depending on like if they do or don't need additional help based on sort of progress to date.
Well, Chief Fard has accreditation as a high priority for the department and the whole command staff. I know the city council does as well. He actually took the initiative of using some salary savings in his budget to bring in a term-limited part-time position of someone who is an accreditation pro, someone who has helped jurisdictions with kind of getting organized for these efforts. So he is actually taking the initiative to do that. I will provide a write-up to give council a little bit more information about that initiative, but I think it was a very positive step that the chief took to move that forward.
No, that makes sense to me. And it was kind of like where I was going in my mind with whether there may need to be like shorter term support for that or kind of, where that may end up. And then I guess the only other things I had was given the follow-up on the road conditions on Haycock and Route 7 in particular. I do think, like the idea of leaving it as is for 6 months is not great. And even, I don't know what the VDOT inspection timeline has been, but I do wonder, has VDOT inspected Route 7 recently, or is Route 7 due for an inspection, given like some of the dips in the road? Like I basically like lost half my bumper on Route 7 this past weekend, so. And then on just citizen comments, since we won't be meeting again for some time. I don't know if the city staff had kind of thoughts on the rapid response team and what we might be able to do, kind of given public comment, about Gundry and Annandale and other places. And then also if there's any update about, I've now heard from multiple folks about continuing issues with the Broad and Washington signal timing and inability to get through that intersection, even with 2 or 3 cycles. Going westbound on Broad, kind of as you're going from like Broadmont
From
through.
experience to that, yeah.
Yeah,
Confirmed.
Yeah.
Problem.
thank you.
Right.
On the citizen requests, I've had a couple people this week tell me that they're excited about the new garage at Broad and Wash, and, we put a lot of effort into making sure that the developer provided EV charging stations and connectivity for the next ones, which is great, except that there's no Wi-Fi, or there's difficult spotty reception down there, and you have to use an app to pay for it. So it's great that you can drive up and plug in, but then you have to go all the way upstairs and remember what it is, connect, pay for it, go back down and make sure it's connected. So if we could ask the developers, there's got to be some way to add repeaters or, some additional service down there, because it kind of defeats the purpose if you get down there and you can't pay for it right when you're there. And to that effect, I think when we did the tour of Broad and Wash, that there was definitely discussion about improving the signage down there about where, what's public parking and how to access the public parking, and that hasn't been put up yet. So if we can just get a follow-up on signage in the parking garage for publicly available.
Meaning at the entrance?
At the entrance, and then when you go back, when you go
Go down
down,
there.
there was, it was like, well, we're gonna color code them, or we're gonna number them, or we're gonna make it more obvious. And I haven't been down there since, but I've had several people tell me it's really confusing, they're not sure where to park. They're excited to have public parking, but they're not unsure. So both accessing it either from Broad or from the Clarendon side, making it clear where you go for public parking. And I know that Joe Muffler was talking about, we understand that was an issue. So if we could just get a follow-up on where the signage is, and then a response on the Wi-Fi, that'd be great. Especially if we can get it addressed before the Whole Foods opens, which, you see all the signs, makes it look like it's gonna open tomorrow, but, so it'd be great to have that.
Moving in the actual produce stuff, and it was kind of exciting to see.
But I did hear not till February.
Oh, really?
Yeah, February heard that.
I thought they were still aiming for Thanksgiving.
We had a visit from staff of the one in Tyson's there, Tyson Station one. They brought food and they said they're all moving over and they didn't think it'd be till February. So.
Dave?
Yeah, and I think, Mayor, you responded as well, another stop sign running incident at Gundry and Annandale. Frankly, we see stop sign running incidents all over the city. Almost every place there's a stop sign, the running incidents are endemic. So I wanted to see if council's okay if I ask CACT to take a look at this, and if we could ask staff to look at, are there things such as stop sign running cameras or other devices. Now, the thought was, well, you could put lights around, flashing lights around the stop sign. Well, the problem is you better put those lights everywhere, because the stop signs that don't have them then look like a joke to drivers.
yeah.
And then they respond, oh, I love to see the light zoom right through. So I think we need to hunt for something effective. I know my neighbors have a video camera and video the four-way stop. I think we've all seen those. I mean, complete with sound effects. I mean, and everybody all across the city is suffering from the same sort of thing. And I think there's also an education element to this, somehow communicating more broadly to the driving public that we just don't tolerate this kind of thing here. I don't know how you phrase it exactly, but anyway, I think we need more thinking here to see, are there engineering issues? Are there electronic enforcement? And I know even getting speed enforcement is difficult. So I think we can discuss that in the legislative committee. It doesn't mean we shouldn't push for it. But what else can we do? What have other jurisdictions, have any other jurisdictions have had any benefit, any positive results from this? But I mean, it's literally, and it's all across the city, and it would be great if we could come up with a citywide approach that actually makes a difference.
Agreed. And red light running, I think, is
Yeah.
flagrant, too.
Yeah,
Should ask Mary Beth about that.
Okay, other requests or items bring up for the schedule? Okay, so we covered Broad and Washington because we got public comment about that. We talked about Annandale, Gundry, Maple and Broad. Wyatt, I forwarded to you again. The
Signal
signal
timing.
timing issue with Maple and Broad. Annandale and Broad is still at 9 seconds for a countdown, Cindy? Same as when we observed it.
Yes.
We also received public comment about, or actually it just came to me, about Grove Avenue and some bad behavior that's happening at rush hour times, but I think the chief already responded to that one, so thank you for staff responding quickly. I think the last public comment we got, given that we're not going to have I guess our next meeting is the 28th when we'll take public comment, is there's a giant hole at Little Falls in the WNOD. I ran past it on Sunday. It is a giant hole. It's covered by a giant cone, luckily, but I don't know if it's ours or if it's Nova Park's responsibility.
So you'll see at every crossing, there is that hole. What they're waiting for is the light to go in. And so that's a Dominion issue. And Dominion is all, kind of all hands on deck in Southwest Virginia and other parts of their
North
service
Carolina.
territory, North Carolina. So we don't have an ETA for them to get those lights in. But that's the reason why the holes are. If we filled them in, we'll find out how long it's going to be. We understand that it's a concern. We need to make sure it's secure.
Yeah, as long as it's covered by the giant cone, there
Yeah,
should be
it
no
is,
immediate
it's
safety
certainly
issue.
unsightly, which we probably can tolerate for a certain amount of time, but unsafe we will not tolerate.
Yep, especially if people are riding at night. You don't want to fall into the giant hole. Okay.
Does any of the Dominion being pulled elsewhere impact, this is just occurring to me now, back to our first topic of the evening on West Falls. Does any of their, them being pulled to obvious higher priorities impact that work that's happening or that they were discussing on the reserve?
Well, I mean, I will say every contractor always struggles with Dominion and Washington Gas and kind of all the big utility companies. I don't think that's been on the critical path. The traffic signals on Route 7 in particular are way behind schedule because of a slow VDOT approval process. And
But Dominion working where they're needed right now is not impacting the development at West Falls. The reserve specifically in the 30-day
It
extension that
sounded
we're
like the
discussing tonight.
contractor was having to do a lot of, the West Falls contractor was having to do a lot of work for Dominion, not needing Dominion. Eventually, they'll need inspections. We're going to see some minor impacts on some of our capital projects where they're designing and doing some of our work. They're out of the area right now.
And it's been related to the Founders Row conversion as well, where
Yes.
that work of undergrounding the power utilities there has, I think there's been like a 2-week delay right now that's directly related to crews being sent elsewhere.
But that was delayed before the hurricane, though.
Yeah.
We had heard from their neighborhood meeting that was already delayed.
It was, but there was additional delay, I guess is the point.
Just trying to make sure I understand what other impacts it has on projects we have ongoing, to appreciate the importance of doing the work in Southwest Virginia and North Carolina, of course, but understanding its impacts on us too.
Right.
Or safety, like those big holes and whatever else.
Two other things I just remembered. On the LED light replacement, I've had some residents, reach out about how it feels significantly darker.
Really?
And, it's like, yeah, we don't want too much light and we don't want like light pollution. But, you know, people who have said, wow, like when I'm walking in the evening now, or I'm out like for a walk with the dog, it's like significantly darker. And that, you know, they sort of were questioning whether, you know, lights were out, but when you look, it's like the LED at whatever the wattage, you know, choice that we made was. And then even drivers have said, like, I feel like I'm driving down certain side streets now and I have like no overhead lighting. I only have the lights on the car. And so I didn't know if that was like a inquiry that the city was hearing at all, or feedback the city was hearing at all, separate and apart from people who had made remarks to me about it, just in terms of like
I actually had the
understanding,
opposite.
or
If
if
somebody,
it was-
I've had the
Yeah.
opposite multiple times, so I've heard the
Yeah. No. Well,
direct
that's what
opposite,
I'm
that it's too
saying,
bright and
so-
it's, you know, it's going in their windows and, you know, why did we have to make those changes? We don't like the color of it, like, it's too bright.
No, that's why
really
I brought it up there, just to see, you know,
Yeah.
what other people had been hearing. And then the other thing that I had was, and it may have just, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, but I was driving, I made the left off of Broad onto West by Founder's Row, so came back behind the back of Founder's Row and got to the stoplight that's at Founder's Row, West, and Park, because I was gonna be going straight down Park. So I was stuck at the traffic light, you know, waiting, and I could see the pedestrians crossing because they had the right of way with the
WND.
countdown. Yeah, at the countdown, well, coming out of the Founder's Row, like plaza, going towards the W
Oh, okay.
and OD. But I could see the numbers going down and the pedestrians had crossed already, but two cars were like coming around the corner, coming from northwest onto whatever you consider that, like the continuation of northwest heading toward Broad. And in my mind, I was like, that's strange, because although normally you're making the right turn, you see the pedestrians. When you're coming down west, I was actually wondering if the cars had the green arrow to turn right at the same time that the pedestrians had the walk signal with the countdown, that they had, you know, like the 15 seconds left, because it seemed to me sort of a recipe for getting hit as a pedestrian, like, because it's not the same sort of right turn that a car generally makes at an intersection, because it's not a hard right. It's that, like, you have the right arrow to go, not thinking that the pedestrian's going to have the countdown on the walk signal. So I don't know, you know, it just occurred to me as I was there, like, whether that signal was actually functioning
I've given that
properly.
feedback for
Yeah.
a different
Yeah.
turning motion. So like if you're on Park and you're heading towards, you're in Park, your Founder's on your left, West is on your right, people will turn right into the pedestrians. So they'll get a walk signal and you can do a right turn. So in general, I think that's an intersection where pedestrians should get priority and it should be frozen.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the crux of my feedback, and I didn't know if
would
the
be my
cars were
conclusion.
turning when they shouldn't have been turning, or if the cars were turning
I think
and
the
it was
light is-
operating like a hard right, even though it doesn't function like a hard right, and the pedestrians, like, are gonna have a higher likelihood of getting picked off by a car.
The light is the same
Yeah.
depending which way you approach it, where I just, having observed it enough
Yeah.
times, I feel like the pedestrian should get the priority and everything should be red. Because which I know may slow things down, and I think the concern is that we would back the traffic up. But there's been enough close calls there that I do worry that we're letting people do right on greens with a pedestrian signal at the same time. So,
It is designed to function like a regular four-legged intersection, so that is a feature. And I think after thinking it through in all sorts of different ways, I think that is the conclusion, that that's the safest way to handle that intersection.
weren't we supposed to update it after that
But
bike
to
accident?
freeze everything is an option. The only comment I will make on that is that it is something that traffic engineers worry about, is that the traveling public that is trying to get home or trying to get where they're trying to get to, sometimes when it's all red and no one can go, it causes bad driver behavior because people start to get really angry. And that is something that they think about. And so that's just another thing when we think about LPIs and other things, that's that's the other consideration that the engineers have, because they, you know, that's what
But
they
it should cut out
observe.
one cycle, right? Because if you let all 4 legs go with green and then everyone's on red, you don't have to wait for the opposite anymore. So it's not like you're adding an extra cycle, making it extra long. That's how scrambles work. I know that scrambles aren't legal in Virginia where you can diagonals too. But essentially, if you freeze all the car traffic and let everyone cross, you know, north-south and east-west at the same time, you've removed one cycle. And so it doesn't actually add car time for people.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Let's add scrambles to the legislative agenda.
Yeah, scrambles is when you can cross
Oh,
diagonally
thank
too,
you.
which
I
think is
love
amazing.
challenges.
But apparently, they're not legal in Virginia, so.
Awesome.
They work, though. I've walked on one, and they don't add more time, because then you just, everyone crosses all at once, and you don't wait for 2 cycles. Okay, thanks for bringing that up, Aaron. I know we've gotten a lot of feedback about that. Okay. That's a lot of transportation safety
It
feedback.
is,
That is
yeah.
honestly the feedback we hear the most about, is speeding in neighborhoods, cut-through traffic, pedestrian safety. So, running stop signs, running red lights, so, okay. Okay, well, I think that's it for schedule plus miscellaneous items. Any final comments before we adjourn for a 1-week break?
Except for the Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in Virginia.
It's kind of a break, yes. At least break from a Falls Church meeting
Till 8:30 tomorrow morning for the Ledge Committee.
and appointments on Wednesday night too, so.
And our staff is going to be receiving an award at the VML
That
meeting
is correct.
on Sunday evening. Yeah. Will there be staff members there to receive it?
So Emily Bazemore will be there. Cindy will be there. I've had a family obligation pop up, and I will not be able to be there on Sunday night.
Okay. I'm glad Emily will be able to be there. She worked hard on that.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good night then.
Thank you.